In this presentation, I just would like to explore with you a fuller understanding of what true happiness is and what it is that we desire on the very deepest part of it, from the very deepest part of our being. Coming to understand the meaning and purpose of our lives is really a strange paradox. It's like we open ourselves to God's unconditional love, and despite our limitations and our unworthiness, we discover not only that God is love, but that we are lovable and that we are basically good. And so our unworthiness is the path that helps us discover the truth. Quite different than what we think it will be. There's Nan Merle is a woman who has translated the Psalms into more contemporary language in her book, Psalms for Praying. And in Psalm 40, she talks about, I waited patiently for God, who came to me and heard my cry. God raised me from the pits of despair, out of confusion and fear, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. And then there's a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to God. Many will see and rejoice and put their trust in the Lord. And so it's out of the struggle that we come to the truth. And as we enter into this process, it's a lifelong process, isn't it? If only we could begin it on day one, we decide that we're going to go on the journey, and we've got 2 weeks vacation, it's going to be over at the end of 2 weeks. It would be nice, wouldn't it? But it doesn't happen according to our plan. Sister Carla, one of our sisters, who lived to be 103, she's a good example of that. She always had every part of her life planned out. She was a Latin teacher and a French teacher, and she was very organized. She always had lists, and things were going this way, and she planned ahead of time. And yet, she planned to live till she was 100. There was no question about that. And she was going to celebrate her 100th birthday in full regalia. And so her 100th birthday came and went, and we celebrated it as she wanted to. But then she didn't die. The journey didn't go the way she had planned. And so at first she was very discouraged, and sometimes you'd hear her saying, I think God has forgotten me. What's going on? Why can't I die? She no longer could see. She couldn't hear. So she had been called to let go of all of her connections, really. It was very difficult. And yet she always had a beautiful smile. And one day when I went in to visit her, I said to her, she could read lips, so I said to her, Carla, you must be so eager to get to heaven. I bet you just can't wait. She said, it's already begun. It's already started. So she had begun to experience God's kingdom here on earth. It's like she no longer was distracted by the daily activities. She simply was resting in God's presence and giving herself over. Benedict says so beautifully, when we come to that point where we come into our true self and we begin to experience God's presence and live in God's presence within us, then there's nothing left to fear, because love casts out all fear. So we'll have nothing left to fear. That, when we image that, it seems almost impossible at this time. And yet as we go on the journey, the love deepens and the fear decreases. And to help us along the way, we have the best therapist in town. God is our therapist all the way through. God is the one who heals our wounds, takes the raw experience that we had from before we were 7, those very early experiences, and begins to heal those experiences that created within us exaggerated needs. We need to be open and surrender so that the wound will heal. You know, when you take a wound, often a doctor will open it, the doctor will open it and clean it out. That's part of our openness. It's like God, as we're open before God and acknowledge our struggles, God slowly but surely cleans out the woundedness. And in that process, we come to know the truth. Once we begin to understand the truth and to begin to know the truth, not just in our head, but in our heart, we begin to have all kinds of energy to live out of that truth. Because all the energy that we used to get our exaggerated needs met now can be used for another purpose. Now we have energy to do for others. And finally, as I said of Benedict saying, casts out our fears. Many of our fears come because we don't believe we have what we need. And as we come to know that God has given us what we need, that our need for security, our deepest need for security, for affirmation and control, is deep within us, and that God is responding to that. And so there's a radical transformation in our motivation. Why we do what we do. We may do the same things, but we do them for a different reason. So the spiritual journey is really a growth in the three faces of love. Growth in love, in hope, and in faith. And when you think of a person who embodies love, maybe we can remember Don Helder Cameron, the Archbishop of Brazil that we talked about earlier. This was a man who, they said that when people met him, there was something special about him. He was just, when they looked into his eyes, they saw love. He responded to people equally loving, whether they were the homeless on the street or whether it was a king or a president from some country. It really didn't make any difference. And so Don Helmer had trusted so much in God's mercy and love that he became God's presence to others. And because he rested in God's love, he was able to reach out in genuine compassion to all people. If we don't rest in God's love and we try to be nice to others, we wear out real soon, don't we? Doesn't last very long. And so it's like we need to step back and draw on the source that gives us life. When we think of the face of hope, the person who comes to my mind is Betsy and Corey, but particularly Betsy in the story, The Hiding Place. Actually, the story was written by Corey because she's the only one who survived the concentration camp. But they were two women from Holland who took in the Jewish people when they were being hunted down by the Nazis. And eventually they were captured and imprisoned themselves because of what they were doing. And in the midst of the persecution and the terrible conditions that they were experiencing, Betsy never lost hope. She always had a sense of hope. And she really believed and experienced God's presence in that terrible place. And so when some of the guards made fun of her because she was becoming very weak and very frail, she just kind of laughed with them and said, "That's true. I am very weak and I am frail and I must look really, really odd to all of you." And so she just laughed with them instead of getting defensive. And then she said to her sister Corey, she said, "Corey, we need to, when this is over and we're freed, we need to have a home so that they can come and be healed and come back, get back in touch with who God created them to be." And Corey thought she was talking about the other prisoners, but Betsy was talking about the guards, the very ones who were beating them and killing them and doing all sorts of unimaginable things to them and to their children. Hope in the face of one of the most horrendous experiences that we've had in our lifetime. The face of hope. And because Betsy was hopeful, Corey was found in herself a greater hope. And Corey eventually did develop a house and invite whoever could come to become and be healed. And then finally, the face.